His was the only boat to arrive.
I think maybe it was a cow. I don't know.
There's the thank you letter from Lyndon Johnson.
There was even a monorail at one point to the east of us.
Plus, everybody forgets about pirates.
This is the coolest field trip I have ever been on.
I don't know, but I've been told, keep on dancing, won't ever get old.
Hello, and welcome to the Long Island History Project, the podcast that brings you stories and interviews with people passionate about Long Island history. You can hear them all at longislandhistoryproject.org. My name is Chris Kretz, and I am your host. And our opening music is courtesy of the Homegrown String Band. I think a good oral history interviewer is part journalist, part therapist, and part hypnotist.
You're going to be able to tell us now about your family, when you first came to Long Beach, some of your memories.
That's Florence Reich First, one of the founders of the Long Beach Historical and Preservation Society, former teacher, and back in the early 1980s, she undertook an oral history project talking to many of her friends, colleagues, neighbors about the history of Long Beach.
Just tell me as much as you want, whatever you remember, and you are beautiful to look at. So please tell me as much as you can. Just talk to me. Please sit back and relax because you look tense.
You can tell she's got a way of putting people at ease, making them comfortable, and in their homes and living rooms and kitchens, she got them to relate their personal histories and also their memories of this very interesting, unique, and beautiful city by the sea. This is another episode featuring co-host Robert Anen from the Long Island Library Resources Council. We are taking a closer look at some of the oral history projects he's helped digitize and put online. So today you'll be hearing from many voices again. We'll be sitting in a room with some of Florence's spiritual descendants, the current members of the Long Beach Historical Society, and we'll also be bringing in Florence and her interviewees throughout the conversation, so hold on. There'll be a full accounting of every voice you hear in our show notes, but we'll start by introducing some of today's very special guests.
I'm Robert Anen, the Project Archivist of the Long Island Library Resources Council.
I'm Phyllis Ginsberg. I'm a member of the board of this Historical Society and also a member of the Collections Committee.
Dan Moran, I'm a trustee at the Society and a member since the early 80s.
Joanne Belli, also a trustee of the Long Beach Historical Society and archivist, volunteer archivist, and how I got involved as the author of the Lido Club Hotel.
Kathi Lismore, volunteer on the Collections Committee.
Okay, and first of all, thank you for inviting us in. Who wants to tell us where we are? Who wants to set the scene?
Well, we're in the Long Beach Historical Society's museum, which is a residence that was built in 1909, one of the first homes that were developed by William Reynolds in this planned community. And in 1997, we purchased this property to use it as a society headquarters as well as a museum.
And would you say craftsman, or who wants to?
It is a craftsman-style house, both on the exterior. It's a stucco house with Spanish tile roofs, which was very much in the mandate of the original estates of Long Beach development. And the interior of the house has many craftsman-style features, including woodwork and so on, that really demonstrate that architectural style.
Okay, and we'll talk more about that planned community aspect of Long Beach, and we'll get into the history. But Rob, since you're here with me, we're sort of sitting around like Florence First would have been when she was doing the interviews in the 80s that we're going to talk about. Do you want to just give us an overview of this collection and how you came to be involved in it?
Yes, well, I've been working with these ladies of Long Beach for, I think, since about maybe 2019, 2020. And we started this digitization project, I think, back in 2021. And it actually came to completion with while I'm working with them as a project archivist for the Long Island Library's Resources Council. And it turns out that Florence First, one of the founders of the Long Beach Historical Society, embarked on an oral history project starting in about 1980. And her part of the collection kind of finishes in 1984 because I think she unexpectedly passed. I think it feels like weeks after the last oral history she recorded. And then the collection was picked up back in the late 90s, early 2000s with the help of Roberta Fiore, who's also one of the co-founders of the Long Beach Historical Society. And at that point, you get some like group discussions, some seminars, and some individual oral histories that Roberta did as part of her work.
I might add, he literally knocked on our door.
Yeah, when I was working as part of a similar project with NYU called the Regional Media Legacies Project, I was just cold calling and literally going to events for historical societies in Nassau and Suffolk because we had no connections, and there was some sort of garage sale going on in the driveway here. And I was just like, got any tapes? Got anything we can work on? And that's how it all began. And that's when I first met Roberta, too.
Yeah, so for anyone here, did the society know you had this box of tapes either in the basement or
Yes, no, they were up here.
Okay.
We were quite aware that we had them. And we had, 80 some odd tapes, I believe. And then we had some VHS tapes as well. So we very much knew we had them. They had been cataloged, but they were just kind of sitting, waiting for somebody to listen to them.
So what's fascinating to me is hearing these people being interviewed. So this is 1980s, but these are people who are in their 70s and 80s. So how far back in time you can go. These are like time machines, these interviews. So a lot of them were coming here or first came to Long Beach in the early 1900s.
Before I was even born, my mother and father first came to Long Beach in 1913. And in those days, you couldn't live down here. So they had rented a house in Limbrook, and during the summer months they would come down.
My family and I arrived in Long Beach in May, must have been May, of 1919.
And they were looking over Long Beach and said, this would be a nice place for you, Daphne and Charlotte, and we'll bring up our children here. And that was in the year of 1922.
I was born in Pennsylvania, and I came to Long Beach in 1926.
If we go back to the turn of the last century, early 1900s, who can kind of fill in just what was happening here?
Well, Long Beach, before the railroad came here, was a very different kind of place. No one really lived here. Instead, it was used by, first the Native Americans, to fish and to hunt, and then by farmers and baymen. And a few people came over from Freeport for the day to enjoy the sand. And then in 1880, the Long Island Railroad from Limbrook to Long Beach started, and a hotel was built, a beautiful, magnificent hotel called the Long Beach Hotel that was right on the beach, and people started to come, and it was very successful. Unfortunately, they didn't last long because of a lot of difficulty with storms and upkeep, and that's a problem Long Beachites have now, too. And what ended up happening is it sort of went under. There were a lot of problems with the title of the land also. And comes along William Reynolds from Brooklyn, a fanciful doer of dreams and developer. And he decided to come to Long Beach and purchase the land. And he had an interesting plan in mind. He had, quote unquote, swindled New York City out of a great deal of land by purchasing it, knowing that they wanted to buy it, and then raising the price. And at the point he came, he was told that that's what New York City was going to do. They were going to buy the Long Beach Hotel as a kind of sanitarium and a park, and he thought this was his opportunity to quickly make a buck by flipping Long Beach, but it didn't happen that way. But he had a wonderful plan B, and we're the beneficiaries of it, and he poured a lot of his talent and money, other people's money, that's how Reynolds
That's the way to do it, I guess.
Yeah, and he built this magnificent community.
So just to get into some of the geography, we're on Long Beach Island, which is one of the barrier islands. So where out by me further east is Fire Island, and then Jones Beach Island, and then Long Beach Island. So it's sort of a chain of these things, and it's close to the city. You're the closest, I guess, or the Rockaways would be the next one over.
Well, most people think that nature created Long Beach, but I say William Reynolds created Long Beach, because the original Long Beach didn't look anything like it looks now, other than the area by the dunes and the beach. It was just swamp area and really not usable. And Reynolds started a major project on, well, what's now called Reynolds Channel. And he really created by filling in land and building out the channel. And Long Beach looks very differently geographically, than it did years ago. And then he created this wonderful planned community.
Yeah, and we were talking a little, that was sort of a movement at the time.
Yes, the early 20th century, and I think the concept actually originated in England and came here. The idea of a planned community, so that you had clean, well-planned streets and buildings, and didn't have eyesores, and it would be morally uplifting to people. And so there were a number of these communities developed. I mean, Forest Hills and Queens and Kew Gardens are examples of them.
Garden City.
And Garden City, certainly. And there were a few that were developed in Nassau, or became Nassau, and in Suffolk counties, although I don't think any of them were as fully realized as Long Beach and have endured as a very concrete, sort of palpable community.
This land, this marshy island clump, was part of Hempstead, right? The town of Hempstead.
Yes.
Well, he purchased the land 1906 from the town of Hempstead.
So they willingly...
He had a lot of work to do on the title. It was a very confused title for this property, from way back to the Native American Indians, who opposed the fact that the European settlers thought that they gave it to them, or so that was always under question, and it just went on from there. And he actually purchased for about $3 million the land of 5 miles of the shore line, the beachfront, which is from basically the West End now all the way to Point Lookout. And that's what it is. But the rest of it was totally marshy. And he convinced the town of Hempstead to hold a referendum and a vote just about a year after he bought the beachfront property, and he convinced them to sell it to him, and that he was going to fill it in, and he was going to create a wonderful tax base for them by building homes when it was just wasted land. And he
His proposal was that they would be enriched by all the property taxes from all the property he created.
We'll be talking a lot more about William Reynolds, but let's start with this interview with Bill McGovern that Florence did back in the 80s. This is Bill reading from some advertising copy that was used to sell Long Beach in those early days.
But the sales pitch in those days was 35 minutes from Long Beach to Herald Square. And they say close enough to leave Manhattan, come out here for dinner and a show or whatever, and then still get back home the same night. They classed it as the real beach with a real surf, the only beach left for New Yorkers to bathe, others being ruined by developers. That's 1909 thing. Temperature is cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter, same things we say now. And the hotels at this time equal Manhattan's finest in comfort, luxury, cuisine, and services.
So, and we should mention part of his backstory. He was a New York State senator, I think.
He was, I believe, the youngest New York State senator.
So he had some political savvy.
He had a lot of political savvy.
As it progressed, I think, and you can all correct me, but it went from he bought it, he developed it, then it was incorporated as a village.
Yes,
and
in
then
1913.
And it became a city in 1922. Part of the impetus for its becoming a city was in order to have their own school district. I'm sure it wasn't the only, but it was one of the reasons why they pushed to become an independent city.
But my experience and research does not indicate that was the major reason. It was Reynolds, and he felt that he would be able to exert more control.
Get his own little fiefdom.
Yes, if he separated from the town of Hempstead.
Speaking about William Reynolds, I think one of the wonderful things about these oral histories in this collection is that because Long Beach was so young at the time, in the 20s, some of these people that you can listen to in this collection actually knew him personally. And that gives a unique perspective into Long Beach.
What else do you remember about Reynolds?
Well, he had a Great Dane dog.
Yes.
And he used to bring it into City Hall once in a while and have my nephew, Tommy Hogan, who was the office boy, He used to have him take the dog for a walk on the boardwalk and give him $1.
Oh, uh-huh.
The first election was held in 1922 when the Long Beach became a city. And I can remember well the first campaign, which was won by Senator William Reynolds, and in which I spent many days passing out pamphlets, pasting up stickers, and playing in a band on a truck which ran around the city drumming up crowds for political rallies.
When Reynolds came back from Florida, in the spring of the year, he parked his boat at the bay, and all the kids from the school used to get down there, and he'd give them all the coconuts to take
We
home.
used to have a party. I remember going there after we had the races on the boardwalk. Every Memorial Day, we had a party. He gave a party for us on his yacht. That I remember.
And used to give all the kids coconuts.
But my mother and father used to talk about him all the time. He was a hero. You know, I always thought he must have been a big consummate because the channel was named after him.
Yeah, that's right. He was.
You know, and that to me was a big honor.
Reynolds was such a dynamic personality and builder that we as archivists have difficulty sometimes figuring out what was and what never occurred. I mean, he'd have postcards, he'd have early maps designed with communities here that never got built.
Interesting. But the elephants happened.
That also was PR.
It was PR, but they were here.
The elephants were here.
Okay.
We don't know for how long. He brought them from Dreamland in Brooklyn. Alice, and what's the other one's name? Was it Fred? Something like that. And lots of pictures, and a lot of people really believe that they built the boardwalk.
Part of his previous development was Dreamland, which was next to Coney Island, one of the Coney Island. So he had access.
It was one of the three major amusement parks at the turn of the century in Coney Island. The most ambitious, it didn't survive because it was a little too ambitious for itself.
I think I read that he watched Dreamland burn from his suite at the Nassau Hotel on the boardwalk. And also he was very well loved by a majority of the taxpayers. And when he was indicted, they went to the Long Beach Tower there of the Long Beach City Hall and stopped the clock.
Right, in protest until he got out.
Until he was freed.
Which is still part of our Long Beach seal now, is the clock stopped at a particular time.
Right.
One of the monikers of the place is the Riviera of the East, right? And you had these huge hotels. So this early clientele, I mean, they were working families here, but there was a tourist destination for a certain level of society. So who came here?
There were many well-known and famous people in Long Beach at the time. It was a very plushy resort. One of them, Sarah Bernhardt.
When Daddy Browning came to Long Beach with his girlfriend, Peaches, she walked the boardwalk with a duck on a string.
Richard Rogers, the composer, he lived 1 block away from us.
And I caddied at one time for Bob Hope and Bing Crosby.
And this was the home of George McManus, the cartoonist who did the Jigs strip.
Well, William Reynolds was an investor in a number of theaters in the city, in Brooklyn and I believe in Manhattan. And so he was very familiar with the theatrical world. And this was a very good place for them to come to recreate because it wasn't that far away from Manhattan. It didn't take that long to get here. There was good transportation back and forth to the city. And so it said that Clara Bow was here. Ziegfeld was here. He was on the bay on what's now Bay Drive.
He also spent his honeymoon with Billy Burke in the Lafayette Hotel, which is right on Park Avenue.
Was Cab Calloway a permanent resident?
Oh, yes, but that's a little later, and that's actually in Lido,
which is to the east of.
Which is to the east. I mean, he was like 3 blocks outside of Long Beach. Also, I think it was Barrymore had a suite in the Nassau Hotel.
So we kind of left off becoming a city into the 20s, and so who wants to get us into the rum running era and the roaring 20s, and how did that play out here?
I don't know to be a fact, but the rumor was there was rum running on our beaches, and the beaches were patrolled by various policemen, to keep the citizens off the beach. And they lit the light on City Hall to show the all clear for the mum runners. Whether it was true or not, I don't know.
I mean, it was so in the open. There were times during the day when the police would close portions of the beach to the run in the daytime, so run runners could come on shore, and everybody could see this happening.
Yeah, and the police force here was very involved in permitting it. And one of the oral tapes that I did listen when I did my presentation called Hooch and History at a local brewery here was Roberta Fiore talking about it. And a lot of the police force really were against, agreeing to allow the liquor to come in. But there was no local ability for them to disagree. If they were told that they had to do it, they had to do it because there was no civil service at the time, and they would lose their job if they didn't do what their bosses and captains were telling them to do.
So when it became a city, it had mayors. So there's a lot of the recordings talk about who was the mayor. And I've memorized, or I have a list of, until they stopped having mayors. So there's a whole other story there. But there's a lot of talk about Mayor Edwards. And there's people in the tapes that knew Mayor Edwards. One person was a witness to this. So who can tell us, and I guess they also called the Dooley case. Was it in the late 20s or was that in the 30s by then? It might have been later.
I believe it was November 17th, 1939.
Okay, so you know the
I know
story.
it because I do a walking tour
Of that
Long
story.
Beach that starts at the train station, and his house, which is still there, is one of the stops.
So what happened to Mayor Edwards?
Oh, I was there. I was there. I kid you not. I was walking up Jackson Boulevard, which was the name of it, and I was around Walnut Street.
We lived at 27 West Penn Street, and Edwards' home was at 22 or 24 West Beach Street. And my sister Janice's bedroom overlooked that, and unfortunately she was a witness to the killing.
She saw it. This
she
I
did.
never knew.
Yeah, she saw the whole thing.
I saw Dooley walking across the street, hailing down a yellow O'Rourke truck. It was an O'Rourke truck.
My God.
Yellow. And there was a black guy riding it, and Dooley had the gun in his hand. Well, the guy was like this, and I don't know what it was. And he says, "Take me to the police station."
It was always a very political town, and this shooting was a direct result of the politics.
There was a very angry police officer. I believe his name was Alvin Dooley. And I think he had been drinking, which happens a lot in Long Beach, especially during Prohibition. He felt that the mayor hadn't supported him to run. It was sort of the equivalent of the Police Benevolent Association, and he lost. And there was a lookout right diagonally across from the mayor's home, and he was right there. And when the mayor was coming out of his house with his assistant to start the day, he said hello to him, and they said hello to each other, and then at point blank range, he shot the mayor.
And I think that was maybe not the sole motivation, but a few years later we went to a city manager system. We abolished having a mayor. We have a city council, and then we hire, with 5 members, and then we hire a city manager.
One thing that did come up, we talked about the planned community, and I guess the darker side of that is the restrictive covenants that might have been in place, sundown town aspects. What would you say, just to get that social history in here, about who you were talking about, the level of society that was coming, but not everyone was technically welcome here?
And Reynolds had made a law. All colored people had to be off Long Beach by 6 o'clock.
I never knew we had no ordinance. Was this before we were made a city? We became a city in 1922. Before that,
This is when Senator Reynolds was still in power. So.
Yeah, but we were a village, then we became a city. So was this when he became mayor? Or before? You don't remember?
All I know is many years ago, as I say, all colored people had to be off Long Beach by sundown. The ones that worked on the boardwalk pushing these strollers.
Right, his character.
All had to have special passes.
I've tried to research and find a copy or a lot of information alluding to the restrictive covenant that Reynolds started with, and I can't find anything, but a lot of people will tell you that certain groups of people were not permitted to come and live in Long Beach in those early days, and they were Jews, and they were African Americans, and there were a lot of new immigrants from New York, Southern Italians, etc. But when he went bankrupt multiple times, but when he went bankrupt in around 1918, and he realized this wasn't working, he readjusted his thoughts on it, and Jews became very prominent in the community.
What do you want to say about the makeup of the town as it developed, like the different immigrant groups that might have come in? It sounds like there were a lot of Germans at some point, just from the last names I'm seeing in the interviews. What's the makeup of the different? Were there neighborhoods, would you say, or the mix of ethnicities?
I think we're a very diverse community.
Right, I do.
Currently.
I think, and I don't know if this is your sense. My sense is that the East End became a little bit more heavily Jewish. Not that it was specifically that, or other sections weren't. More heavily Jewish. I think the West End became known as being fairly, as it evolved, be heavily Irish, but not obviously exclusively. And there was a sorting out. I mean, we have two major Catholic churches. St. Mary's really goes back to really around 1912. There was a Monsignor from Brooklyn who had built a summer residence, and the Irish servants who would come during the summer approached him about holding Mass on Sundays, and out of that evolved St. Mary's Church. That church itself was originally built in 1917. St. Ignatius, which is very large, is built in, I believe, the 1920s or the early 30s. At one point, we had 5 or 6 synagogues. We have fewer now. The People's Church, which was non-denominational, goes back to 1922. The north of Park Avenue became a predominantly black, and now it's heavily minority section.
I'd like to add something about the makeup of Long Beach. Initially was the estates of Long Beach, and he was really catering to the rich, high-end homes, large lots. And at the World War I time frame, it wasn't going well, so he started looking at other elements of blue-collar workers could come in. So the houses to the east and the west of the center part of town became bungalows, smaller homes, are more affordable to people coming in. It wasn't quite a restriction on their makeup as much as financial reasons that a lot of it changed. And a lot of these mansions of the estates remained on empty blocks for years because it didn't sell well initially. And then he lost, the markets went bad, and then he started looking around and saying, I have to change my financial program.
Yeah.
Well, Reynolds, finances were dictating to him that he had to downsize on the kinds of lots and houses that he was building in Long Beach. He still moved further east to Lido Beach, which is the next community east of Long Beach, and he built this most magnificent hotel. It's the Grand Dame of Long Beach, called the Lido Club Hotel.
And golf course.
And that was a private community. That was the hotel that was supposed to be adjacent to the magnificent golf course that was built in 1914. And he was very selective on who could stay there. When I was writing the book, I came across a lot of lawsuits with people that were literally thrown out of the building because they were Jewish. So that whole idea of exclusivity and private was still on his mind. He just moved it further east.
Outside of town. Well, I have a great story I want to bring up from the interviews involving World War II. So do you want to just finish the story of Lido Beach, like what happened to it during World War II?
And we can talk about the Nassau Hotel in World War II also.
Okay.
Well, World War One, I mean.
The Nassau Hotel in World War One was requisitioned by the government and became a hospital. And in 1942, the United States Navy requisitioned the entire of Lido with its 180 acres and this magnificent hotel. And what happened there is they occupied it for several years, and it was actually the prototype for the separation of servicemen from service at the end of the war.
They were being
right, and earlier in the war they were being trained.
So Foster Fogel, who did an interview, he was in the Navy. He was stationed at Lido Beach. He got a great story of when they were shipping out. They parade through town.
We formed up the parade early in the morning, about 8:30, and started to march down Park Street. And the first person that appeared was a fellow named Levy, a butcher, who had a butcher shop in the area of
East Park Avenue.
East Park Avenue, between Roosevelt and Pacific. And he came out with a great big salami, which he presented to me in front of 1,100 men.
Oh, I didn't know.
Which I gave to one of my men to carry for me. As we went down another couple of blocks, a big limousine, chauffeur-driven limousine, appeared, pulled up alongside of me, and kept pace with me. And inside, in the rear, was a woman well known to most of the old-timers named Fan Robbins, who kept blowing kisses at me, again in front of the whole crew, all the way down to about Long Beach Boulevard. We continued on, and we reached the vicinity of a bar named Cappy's. And Cappy appeared with a great big tray of shot glasses full of whiskey.
Oh.
And I was forced to turn my head away so that he could give it out to the sailors.
Just a sense of what the town must have been like in the 40s, that camaraderie or.
There was also a major USO over in a building that St. Mary's built for that purpose, but later became part of the church after the war ended. There was a major USO, and there was a lot of involvement in people in the communities in that. And I think community involvement in general, because there's such a strong sense of place here, was very strong.
I mentioned this in our previous interview that it's not part of my job requirement, but one of the things I try to do is get these recordings back to the descendants of these families. Because again, people don't know these things are here. And if, there was a lost recording of my great-grandfather, I would want to know, and I'd want someone to do the little legwork required to potentially find me, whether that's on Ancestry or Facebook or whatever. And so I was doing this a couple months ago, and I had found that one of the oral history participants, Daphne Mulligan-Schlake, had a big family tree on Ancestry. So I reached out to the person who owned the tree, and it was her granddaughter, and they couldn't have been more excited and gracious. Again, they had no idea that it had existed, this recording of their grandmother. Truly their favorite person on earth.
I'm just going to jump in here and say you've heard from Daphne a few times already, but I just will add another clip in here to show you why she should be your favorite person too. This is Daphne telling Florence about a prank they used to play on the chief of police.
And I remember when we used to have house parties, we'd collect all the empty liquor bottles and put them on Chief Tracy's porch on the way home.
Oh, my. Where was he living?
He was living over here, I think, on Market Street. Had a house with an open porch, and we'd deliver our bottles there on the way home that night.
Did he know who put them there?
No, we never found out.
He never found out?
Never let on. He wouldn't know.
Right.
We'd drop the bottle and run like
But then the other wonderful thing that had happened was I was trying to get, there's a recording of a woman, Selma Raphael Shanebaum, who was actually one of the first graduates of Long Beach High School. I tried to reach out to someone who owned her family tree on Ancestry. They didn't respond, but I found someone on Facebook who ultimately responded to me, her grandson, and it turned out that the family had already found the recording of Selma.
Really? Good for them.
I felt it was such a beautiful moment.
Yeah, well, and it's a great job you all did with keeping we call it the metadata, but the information about the names is in the record, so anyone Googling diligently should find it.
Well, it's not as simple and straightforward as you may think, because again, Florence knew these people personally. what happened was she would just write someone's first name or maybe someone's last name on a tape because she probably assumed that she'd be doing this for years. And like I said, I think she maybe unexpectedly passed at 72 and in 1984. And a lot of the legwork that I had to do was actually give these people their identities back. This was one of the oral history projects where I had to spend a lot of time getting these things right and listening to a lot of these recordings when I may not have had the time to, because I can't just say James from Long Beach has an oral history or Mr. So-and-so has an oral history. That doesn't serve the material well.
And sometimes you have to listen for a while to get the context, and then they finally say something that lets you connect all the dots and say, okay, this is this person.
Because they don't always say where sometimes they say where they lived, but I will have to then listen to the context clues of say, oh, my sister Mary or my father John. So then as I'm listening to this, I am typing this information into Ancestry, correlating their address to the time they're talking about, and then making sure that, oh, here's a James McManus with a sister Mary and a father John. Oh, and they're living at this address. This is the James that I'm listening to.
I always like to ask, so for your area, how many people on Long Beach are interested in this history? Do you have a good level of engagement? Do you have to sort of go out and convince people, here's what's happening, or do you get curiosity, people coming in?
Dan, why don't you talk about the forum a little bit?
Well, I started the forum a couple years ago.
On Facebook.
Piggybacking off of groups that were within Long Beach, if you grew up in Long Beach and that sort of thing. And it had a lot of historic aspect to it, but also a lot of personal, more recent stuff. So it took off like crazy. I mean, within the first year, I think I had more than 3,000 people, and now it's approaching 5,000. Most everyone's interested in history. Not everyone's on Facebook, I find. So there's a lot of people that are missing out on it. But as I meet people, many people are interested in the old stories of Long Beach because it is such an unusual place.
And I will say, as because the oral histories and the videotapes are now on New York Heritage, there are really great examples of Jewish American history in Long Beach and also African American history in Long Beach that you can now see and hear on New York Heritage coming from their own perspectives. And I just wanted to say how grateful I am to the group of people in this room, because the only reason the history of Long Beach will be continued to be talked about and researched and enjoyed is because of all of these people in this room. And I am personally grateful for them.
Let me start by saying thank you to Phyllis and Dan and Joanne and Kathi and Rob, and also to Jeanne Browne, the current president of the society, who was in the room there with us. We barely scratched the surface. We got to cover just about the first half century of Long Beach's history, as shown in those oral history interviews, but there is so much more. Years of decline and rebound and rebirth. So check our show notes for links to related resources and all that the Society is doing. I'll mention that they've got author talks, walking tours, Thursday chats on different topics, changing artist exhibits in that beautiful Craftsman House. And one big thing to note, August 23rd and 24th, there will be a boardwalk fair along that boardwalk in Long Beach, the one that was not built by elephants. Proceeds from that fair will go to support the Society's work. So if you haven't been to Long Beach or haven't been in a while, get out there, get some sand in your shoes. That's August 23rd and 24th. That does it for this episode. We will continue looking for other oral histories and bringing you voices from the past. So stay tuned. Hope you're having a great summer. Our outro music is Capering by the Blue Dot Sessions, used under an Attribution 4.0 international license. And as always, thank you for listening. And Florence, anything else to say?
Well, this is great, but we're going to stop now. All right, I know that...